This episode is powered by DenMeditation.com. Though meditation is the primary focus, the bigger goal is for people to understand and love themselves, thus creating more harmony in the community at large. To find out more about Den Meditation's teacher training programs, retreats, and all things Den Meditation, go to DenMeditation.com. Welcome to DENtalks Podcast. This is Tal, your host and the founder of Den Meditation. We have Laura Day again. She's amazing. She is a psychic. She has been on CNN, Fox News, Good Morning America, The View, Extra, and Oprah. I mean, she's been everywhere. She's been written up in every magazine, every newspaper. She's huge. She works for companies. When companies want a crystal ball, this is who they go to. She has helped solve missing children's cases. And she also works for individuals too, but now she mostly teaches people how to harness their own intuition. She's fascinating. We really get into how to work with your intuition, how the inside vibration has to match what you are pitching out there. And one of the things I love about her is she's very practical. So it is about data points. It is about how to actually create action in your physical body. You can't just be floating up there in the stars to actually make things happen. She actually refers, to spirituality as a big blob. Like if you just tap into the, spiritual energy, then it's just a blob, but you're a person, you're an individual. How do you individually make things happen in your life that you need and you want? And so it's amazing. She's just also just so much fun to listen to. If you want a really deep conversation kind of about how her childhood was, because we hint on it and we touch on it today, go to episode 78, her first episode with us. We really get into more of her personal stuff. We talk a lot about intuition. We tap into the personal stuff towards the end as well. She's fantastic. Her personal practice is great. And once again, very practical, something we all need and can do. I really hope you enjoy this episode. I hope you are just inspired to remember how powerful you are, because I think that's what Laura does for me and hopefully for you as well. I was going to tell people, anyone, Laura's amazing and we've had her on before. If anyone wants some of her like true personal history and stuff like that, go to episode 78, because we went in pretty deep when I had you on a couple years ago. So anyone wants even more, it's episode 78 of DENtalks, which is incredible. How have you been? I mean, you rode the pandemic out beautifully well, I feel like.
Well, both my husband and I were really fortunate during the pandemic because we work from home. We were in London. We live at home. We work from home. My husband's a screenwriter. We know what I am. We don't say it in polite company, but, and it was great because for me, although my heart broke for the people who were going through all the difficulty, I felt useful. I started going on, and I still do it. I started going on live every morning in my pajamas from my sunroom in London. We did a big pool of like money and resources so people could come on and say, I don't have diapers or I don't have medicine. And we did that all through the pandemic. So I really felt like I was useful. And I think that was the hardest part of the pandemic for people. Other than obviously the loss of life, was that people didn't feel useful. They didn't have the normal structures where they could engage. So it was amazing. And then we moved back to New York also during the pandemic. I have some photos of everything my husband made me wear on the plane: shield and mask and a zipper up antibacterial suit and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, despite his hypochondriasis, we got back to New York, and I've continued going on Instagram Live every morning or every evening, once a day. And this group is amazing. They stay at each other's houses. They vacation together. They promote each other's work. It's about, all told, when everyone's in, it's about 25,000 people. And they're amazing. And we really see that when you put people together and you say, okay, we're all here to help each other, generosity is incredible.
And it's so funny that you feel like you said it was nice to feel useful, because I feel like with what you do, whether it's one-on-one as a psychic, whether you're working for a company, whatever it is you do, or just giving people tools for themselves, you are always so useful. But it's interesting that it was something about the tangibility of something. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, it was also, I was, what I do for work is I predict the future for the same companies I've worked for 30 years. With my students, when I train them as intuitives or as healers, I also feel useful. I'm uncovering a skill for them and I'm giving them a livelihood because I don't take private clients. So anybody who reaches out to me just gets channeled to my students. And I read my students, and I'm very overly involved in all of their lives. And considering how many they are, it is really, my students are my life and my extended family. I think in many ways, the intuitives that I've trained felt powerless during the pandemic because, a lot of people go to readings to be reassured and not to gain tools to change things. And it wasn't a reassuring time. So I think many of my students who are now professionals actually felt very challenged. But our mottos during the pandemic, and they have persisted today, is look for the can do in a situation. There's always plenty you can't do, but look for the can do. And those who use the pandemic to educate themselves online, to plan, to find resources, public resources that they didn't know were available. Those who used that time for a can do dealt with the problems because, of course, listen, for anybody, problems are always significant, but dealt with the problems and looked for the potentiality in it now are doing better than they would have ever done without the pandemic. Not without blood, sweat, and tears, but
Right.
better than they've ever done. And our other motto was, "You are not alone," because
So
you
lovely.
know one of the things that you realize is that for intuition to work, we have to live in a unified field, and there's enough convincing research now that intuition actually does allow us to communicate with each other over a distance or even with someone we don't know, does allow us to predict the future, does allow us to view or even inhabit a remote location. And now that we have the instrumentation to actually measure how the brain responds, we can really see it's not anecdotal evidence anymore. We can actually see, oh yes, this person's brain is reacting to someone 1,000 miles away being energetically in a room and not even knowing it was happening. So we can now see that. And during the pandemic, that was all so useful because people were at a distance from their loved ones. You couldn't be with your parent or child in a hospital. And so the ability to use these tools was even more useful and pronounced. So you are not alone was our other motto. Look for the can do,
I love
and
that
you
can
are
do.
not alone. Because if you are alone, you just need to move an inch to the side and you will find a whole community. We tend to get stuck in patterns, and so we don't find those communities, which is why groups are such, unbelievably powerful things.
How, you said the intuition, you need community for intuition. Can you bridge that gap for me a little bit in this?
Yes, well, your intuition demonstrates that we are always in communication because one of the things, we're an evidence-based group. And what I mean by that is even though a lot of beliefs can be incredibly powerful, whether they're angels or past lives or spirit guides, we deal with only with what we can verify. So in their free time, I'm sure all my students are using angel cards, but in their work time in our group, we work with only data that can at some point be verified. And we have a methodology for bringing out that data, for verifying it, or sometimes disproving it, and for working on our system. But if you can get a reaction from someone you've never met 1,000 miles away who has no idea you're doing it, it really shows us that we're never alone. You're always in communication with your environment. And that has upsides and downsides. I mean, people put intuition synonymously with some kind of magical grace, and it's not. Good sociopaths, as I've said before on your show, are good intuitives. It's really how you
Probably
engage
great
with it.
intuitives.
Great, and exactly how you
Yeah.
engage with it and how you direct it. So a lot of intuitive training for a good life, the kind that I've done at the Den in 1-day workshops, is really about, okay, this is the part of intuition that's letting me feel everybody's depression and trauma and making me unable to get out of bed, even though I myself am not depressed. And this is the part of intuition that's alerting me to the details of opportunities that I can act on to create the life that I want. And there is, we train our intellect and our emotions over a lifetime, but intuition, which is so powerful and actually present in us as babies before we are intellectual or able to regulate emotionally, intuition's just allowed to wreak havoc and run wild. And so, you look at someone, I just posted in London a workshop on relationships, whether they're business or love, because you look at someone saying, well, I'm so nice to my partner, I don't understand why they're so reactive and suspicious. But meanwhile, your dialogue with them internally is accusing and nasty and critical. They're hearing you and they're confused. There's a dissonance. Wherever there's a dissonance, something doesn't work.
Talk about that a little bit more. That's interesting. So what you're saying is, because we're all naturally intuitive, whether we're aware of it or not, sometimes you're hearing or picking up what the truth is that someone may not be expressing. So correct me if I'm wrong, what you meant by like with the, go ahead. I meant what someone might be,
their feelings. Yeah. Because
so if someone's in a partnership, go ahead.
The truth is often, gee, I hate that you don't help me in the house. I hate that you're so stingy with money. I hate that you are such a sloppy kisser, but I love everything else about you. And I want to work on these things because you're so magnificent. I mean, there is, truth is very subjective. Correct and incorrect and data points isn't, which is why we love them. But truth used in that way is subjective. But yes, when you may be expressing to your child everything's okay and experiencing, oh my God, what am I going to do? And that dissonance gets through. And really the work is, and let's use the example of a child because that's the most difficult, I think. The work is, how can I be honest with my child in a way that isn't flooding, that is age appropriate? So maybe, not mommy and daddy are fine because they know that's not true. And then they don't trust anybody. And it exacerbates whatever fear or acting out or bedwetting or aggression they may be having. But you know what? It is not an interesting relationship if people don't have conflicts. And the wonderful thing is daddy and I right now have some disagreements, and we're really, really working hard on making things better because of them. Do you have anyone you disagree with who you work? Remember when I really didn't want you to buy that art set and you really wanted it and we disagreed, and then we came to a really great arrangement and you bought another art set that you really love? That's what mommy and daddy are doing. So it's so important, because then your child can put that in taken care of and focus on daily living, which is one reason, by the way, we don't develop intuition in children, is we don't want them flooded. We want them forming good egos and adaptive personalities.
So talk about that. Well, this is so interesting because I think so many of us, the kid is such a great example because it's obvious people have this natural inclination of like, how do I protect them? And sometimes by protecting them, like you said, you're creating a dissonance that they're actually picking up on, and it's confusing the matter even more. But I think we all do this to some effect with relationships, boss, not, employee, lover, best friend, this idea of like not wanting to hurt someone's feelings. But what I love what you're saying is this natural intuition we have picks up on the vibration nonetheless.
Yes. And it's not always not wanting to hurt someone's feelings is part of it. The other is not wanting to deal with it.
Right.
The fact of the matter is the person you're living with defines in so many ways your reality. it is worth the trouble to work it out or walk out. I mean, it is worth the trouble to engage and to find adaptive ways to engage. What we don't realize is that in our inner dialogue, we also have to find those adaptive ways to engage. So, I mean, I'm married to a very traditional man. 15 years before I met him, one of my students described him perfectly. And one of the things she said is a Colorado cowboy, macho. I am married, this product of the 60s is married to a macho man. And if he weren't married to a psychic, no one would ever know what he's feeling or thinking. And that has been an issue because I will have not because I'm a psychic, because I'm a human. I'll have a whole argument with him sitting in front of him without him ever saying a word. I do both sides, and it's not great. And so what I've learned to do, because if I say, you know what, you're not sharing with me, I'm speaking like every other person who's criticized him in his life. When I say, you know what, I love you, and I'm so interested in how you feel about this. I may not, respond the way you want. You may be worried that I'm going to be angry, but I really want to know you better. And it has slowly, I've been married 12 years, and this is still a work in progress. Slowly, it's created a dynamic where not only does he share more with me, but he's actually aware of it in the first place because I've asked him to share it with me. And so the typical thing that happens in our home is like, I don't know, one of the kids will do something nasty to him. He'll be just so nice about it, and I'll blow up at him. And he is experiencing the distress, but he doesn't metabolize it. I experience it, as we all do, not because, again, I'm an intuitive, and I have the reaction. And what I've learned to do is to notice when I'm doing that and say, you know what? Wow, that must have been really, hurtful. And I'll say, oh, no, it's fine. I expect it. And I'll say, you know what? I don't think so, because I'm feeling this way. So let's have a glass of wine and talk about it. Unfortunately, he holds his liquor much better than I do. So 2 ounces in, but anyway, it's, the secondary agendas, the subtext, those are real conversations, and they need to be had. Just like if you're doing something you want to get away with, you need to internally frame it in a way that someone else won't get on to you. I mean, one of the most helpful things I think with my students is that they realize that it doesn't mean they have to be 100% honest all the time. It means they have to work inside of themselves to find a position where what they're doing and what they're saying appears the same. And that takes a lot of reframing, redescribing. And often, and again, this is what communities are so good for. Often it's helpful to have a group of people that you can say, my boss is an ass, I really hate him, but I want him to promote me and I want to be indispensable because these are the best benefits I've ever had. What's your sense? And the person will say, you know what you're really reacting to is this person is someone who really just kind of doesn't consider the contributions of others, but they work really hard. They don't consider their own either. And so if you held that reality, maybe how you deal with your boss would shift. And so you do. And without even having to think of how am I going to change, all of a sudden you're shifting. And that's the wonderful thing about intuition is intuition's a survival skill. So, I mean, have you ever been mid-argument and you realize you are just being a bitch? You actually are completely wrong. And you keep arguing. But
I've gotten a little better. I've gotten a little better at being like, okay, time to just backtrack.
Right. And I've learned how to apologize. Like often I'll
Hmm.
make it up to people, but I've learned how to just say, "Wow, I'm sorry. I was wrong. That was out of line and I should not have spoken to you that way. Please." And it's amazing how much easier that is than sending flowers and offering to clean their closet. It's so much easier.
Offer to clean their
Um,
closet.
but once you're aware of something, you begin to make adjustments. You not just intellectually, rarely emotionally, because emotions are so reactive, but intuitively. You begin to find other ways you can do the same thing
Talk a
and do
little
it
bit.
more economically.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about this kind of aligning of the out and the in and how important it is. Because you keep saying like changing this internal dialogue, like expand on that a little bit more because I think it's the root of almost everything. So I feel like
Okay,
if all
let
of
me
us
work on
realized, yeah, go ahead.
let me work on our number one, I think, especially as women, terror and anxiety. Now, terror and anxiety are rarely based in the present because in the present, if we're mindful, we're engaged, and intuition is leading us to what we can do if we're mindfully, positively engaged. However, what happens often is that we either imagine something's going to happen or we intuit something that we may not be ready for now, but we'll probably be ready for when we get there. And and I mean, this is especially true of people who lean toward intuition because the precognition floods as opposed to being filtered by our intellect and our ego and our defenses. So what happens? You are worried someone's going to leave you. You because you haven't been intuitively trained, you don't realize you're seeing 40 years in the future where you're going to be with someone really hot and your kids will be raised and it'll have been wonderful and you're glad they're leaving because it keeps you from having to make that decision. But none of that comes in because you're not using your intuition. All you have, because let's say you were left as a child, is this terror. Now, the intuitive way to reframe that is this may be real, this may be a fear, but either way, it's something that I need to deal with now because it's upsetting me now. How do I deal with this? Okay, what are my fears around being left? Heartbreak. Okay, I think I need to make myself more resilient because the effort to control other is always a waste of energy, unless they're a kid. And even then, you got to negotiate. So, okay, I'm worried about my livelihood. I'm going to go back to school. What else am I worried about? I'm worried about disappearing in my social community. Okay, I'm going to put some efforts in finding communities now that support me now that I enjoy. I'm worried my kids will hate me. Okay, well, what can I do? And intuition, especially, and remind me to tell you about sleep work. Intuition will help you come up with methodologies for communication where difficulties don't become barriers, they become conversation points. Um, so you deal with the future in the present. You don't assume that you're correct, but the issues they bring up are valid issues, whether or not your precognition, your future telling was correct. Um, and there are times intuition is not subtle, and it's not repetitive. If you are going to die in a fiery crash, I guarantee that your intuition isn't going to alert you until 3 days before the crash, and you'll make different arrangements. Um, I don't like being out of control. I'm going to tell you a little story. I don't like being
Please.
out of control. So I hate things like planes and boats. Things I don't drive, I don't like. Um, even mobile sidewalks, don't love them. So I always was anxious before taking flights. but I'm also very cheap. So I book my flights months in advance. So, although I like to think of myself as conservative rather than cheap. But so one day, and I think this is back in the 1980s when we had paper tickets, changing a flight was a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
One day, I wake up the day before I'm supposed to leave, and I think I'm too afraid to get on that plane. I'm not comfortable getting on that plane. And I lost, back in the 80s, a plane ticket to Italy cost the same as it does now, basically, even more sometimes. I lost a huge chunk of fare changing the ticket to 2 days later for 2 days, just because for once out of the probably 50 times I would traveled to Italy and hundreds of times on a plane, I was too uncomfortable. That the morning that I was supposed to arrive in Italy, there was a mass shooting at Rome airport.
Mm-hmm.
So intuition is not going to say, oh, this person's going to leave or you're going to die in a fiery crash. Or it's not, because what are you going to do about it? Intuition gives you actionable things. And that's the biggest question I get is, how do you differentiate between fear and intuition? Intuition says, do this. It doesn't even sometimes tell you why. Do this, and here's how to do it with the least loss possible. It doesn't give you, if a boulder is going to fall on you in 100th of a second, it's not going to let you know it. It's going to let you die happy, because we repress what it is we can't manage. That's what our ego does for us. And that's what our brain does.
So to that effect, when you said, like, I am, I get nervous. I don't like being out of control. I don't like to fly. I don't like that stuff. Talk about, for someone, let's say, who has anxiety for flying, how do they differentiate that idea of every time the idea of flying puts a pit in their stomach versus something here needs to change?
So first of all, you set a goal, and your goal is to stay safe, not even to fly comfortably, to stay safe. Once you have that goal, you can assume that you will be alerted when you're not safe. But you bring in some logic. Let's say you've flown 20 times. Nothing has ever happened, and you have been equally afraid each time. You know you're dealing with pathology and not prediction. And I really treat, it's especially hard for somebody like me because most of the time I am right, although not all of the time. And the person I'm least right about, like everybody else,
Probably
is
you.
myself.
Yeah.
Because, I have my own twists and turns, probably a little more than most. And so I do a lot of reality testing. Actually, reality testing is a great intuitive exercise. And reality testing is really, okay, here's the reality. Less than X% of planes go down. I have taken now hundreds of plane trips in my lifetime, and I am fine. Chances are I'm really off base here. And I do get on the plane, except that one time that I didn't. And actually the plane was safe. The baggage claim wasn't. The shooting happened in the baggage claim. Most of your fears really are just fears, because intuition comes with a solution. I mean, I strongly felt that I needed to change my fare, even though there was a cost. But that happens every blue moon, because most of the time, especially if your intuition is working for you, you are already you're not booking the flight that would be dangerous. And often we say, oh, why didn't my intuition tell me that I was going to divorce a man who kept me in a 10-year legal battle? Why? Because in that marriage, I grew up, I had a child, I had time to fall completely apart from a very devastating childhood and the support to do it, because there were other things that were important. And that 10-year battle made me a New York Times bestselling author, taught me that I had a skill I could charge a lot of money for, really made me autonomous in the world the way an easy solution would not have. And, 2020 hindsight is wonderful. But often when we look at why did we do this, we see why. And then the really important part is how do I not replicate it? So I replicated that with my next partner because I just wasn't self-aware at that age enough to say, oh, I seek battles because battles are how I change. And I wrote a book as a result called Welcome to Your Crisis. What's another way I could change that wouldn't cost me $2 million in 10 years of my life?
Right.
And intuition does give you that.
But it's interesting because, like you said, you had to go through it to get to that next point.
Right.
So it's like you go ahead.
No. And one of the things that is wonderful about self-help, one of the reasons I love writing self-help is that if you give somebody a system to follow, to kind of a prosthetic operating system to overlay the one that's getting them in trouble, and they try it out and they see results, you can save them that pain. In a way, I think self-help authors are giving us an economy of life that brings a joy of life that's important. And the book that I am publishing next spring is all about the ego. It is in a strange way an anti-spirituality book because it's about, hey, if we're all one energy, then spirituality is regressive. It is your commercial break to reset. But here's the function of the ego and how it creates for you in the world. And here are ways to fix it, to renovate it, to direct it in a way that gets you the results you want. Because there's nothing more amazing than having a system where you do something and there is an assured result. Because then our creativity, our joy, our relaxation, our connection to one another and the world around us has the space to actually be actualized.
So how do you, when you talk about the ego, it sounds like your hypothesis is more like instead of this idea of banishing this ego or pretending it doesn't exist, how can you get it to work with you and for you?
Well, someone without, an ego is anything that you can start with I love, I champion, I care, I hate, anything with an I. Without an ego, you're what I call the blob. You're just part of spirit. You're nothing. And the rudiments of ego are even there at birth because we have that genetic framework that is the precursor to the ego. And then if we're lucky, we get poured into good caretakers who set good examples for ego foundation and encourage us to develop those skills on our own. Ego, when someone says, oh, I have no ego, I say, well, it's incredible you're walking around. I have a good, psychiatric hospital referral for you. Because ego is the architecture through which we create businesses, love, relationships, buildings, interactions. Without ego, there's nothing in our material being or our material world that exists. And yet, when people, I heard a phrase that I'm going to steal and reuse over and over again. No is a complete sentence. I thought, that is God speaking to me. No is a complete sentence. When we speak about ego, we're really speaking about damaged ego when we use it in a dismissive way. Because the ego, if you have if your ego in its intellect is developed, you can build the world, you can foresee the world. And it's a hugely important thing. And of course, you can't tolerate having an ego because having an I is really hard work. If you don't have practices like, I'm not a meditator, but my meditation is walking mindfulness because, I have no idea what year it is or where I am in space time unless I really focus on, oh, okay, Laura, your name is Laura. You're in a body. Your body needs to be fed. You are in New York, this chair. Oh, yeah, let me experience it. And your power is not in your forecasting or your telepathy or anything. Your power, all of those gifts work wonderfully if you're in your body in the present. And most
Yep.
of the time, we spend very little time there. I have a little thing I do on Instagram every once in a while. I repost it, and it's called time zones. The past, we spend a hell of a lot of time
Yeah.
there. The future, also spending a hell of a lot of time there. The non-local, I wonder what they're doing. I wonder what he's doing. I wonder what's happening there. We spend very little time where we have the power to take something and move it. And that place is the present. And I see you do through Den a lot of mindfulness. And, even things like sound meditations. I can never stay still that long, but a sound meditation connects you to your environment through sound, finds that vibration within you, and all of the sudden you're mindful.
And talk about the relationship with ego to that, like how you make sure that your ego is not so connected to all these projections that it allows you presence.
Well, if you are working on your I, if you're working on your ego, then you use that energy we all share that we think of as spirit, which I call the blob, because spirit does nothing unless it's channeled through a structure. It's just a
Right.
blob of energy. It's wonderful. It has infinite potential. It has infinite knowing, but it can't do a hell of a lot. It's a blob. But when we channel that through the I, I love, I enjoy, I want to help, I want to connect, I want to put that in my mouth. When you connect it through the I, then you become the creator of reality. And I think that we need to really shift from saying ego is a bad thing, because ego is everything in a material world, to egos are things that they're machines. We're machines, and we sustain damage. And we notice damage by the parts of ourself that are painful or the parts of our life that aren't working. If you're not being adequately financially rewarded for what you're doing, you have an fourth ego center injury. And there are ways to deal with that: forgiveness, generosity, connection. Because what that means is that when you were born, whatever, intentionally or not intentionally, you never had the experience that you have a right to exist and to thrive. And so the good news with ego work is that as an adult, you can fix that. In fact, only you can fix that. And when I say only you and you in relationship, because we are, again, going back to the beginning,
Community.
one of the things about intuition, we are always in relationship. So the question is, who are you in relationship? I get a lot of requests, for example, for forwards to books and requests for help. And all of these people could request in a way that would elicit a yes, because the from value comes actually being of value. You and I barely know each other, but know each other very well, and we're of value to each other. You're always in an interaction looking for, Laura, what can I do for you? And I'm always looking for, what can I see for you? So when you approach, that I'm giving a simple example of ego. Let's say you weren't valued just because you were. And by the way, you miss that unconditional love chance, except for you to yourself, because only babies should be loved unconditionally. Otherwise, we cheat them. We want them to be of value, to find ways to be of worth in the world. And it's important to remember that studies have shown that purpose, the exercising of one's worth, predicts longevity better than smoking, food, exercise. The only thing that challenges that may even surpass its effectiveness is contact. So
So
done.
true. No, it's so true.
So
I mean, you see it, people who have purpose, regardless what it is, yeah, they tend to stick around.
but we don't approach, because we know our own needs and we undervalue what we have to offer, we don't approach life as an exchange. There's a nasty word. Oh, this is transactional. Guess what? Everything in life
Everything's
is a
transactional.
contract, is transactional, as well it should be for adults. One should be of use, and one should find and reject what is not of use. And even for example, charity is of use, giving here, but it's of use. You are a person who you want to be. I have another quick story. At the beginning of
Yeah,
COVID, and I
please.
may have told this one, at the beginning of COVID, I sent out a newsletter. And I basically, and my husband said, don't do it. You're going to be overwhelmed. But I sent out a newsletter and I said, you know what? I'm still working. I'm setting aside a nice chunk of money. You all who have needs, you let me know. And my husband was really, this is so no boundaries. This is such a bad idea. And I was overwhelmed. He was absolutely right. But he was wrong, because I was overwhelmed. Everyone in my group, and again, it's a pretty large group, misread it. Not everyone. Some people made requests, very modest ones, by the way. Diapers. I can't find Pampers.
Right.
I can't find eardrops. I have nobody to deliver my medicine because I have COVID, and the doorman at Queens Village, or I forget where it was, won't let the delivery person the delivery person wasn't allowed to go through, and the doorman wouldn't bring it up and even leave it in front of a door with COVID. So one of our first responders said, oh, I'm around all the time, I'll bring it up. So, and had the credentials to do so. I was overwhelmed with people saying, oh yeah, me too. I was lucky. I saved a lot, or I'm retired. So my income is, please where do I donate? I was offering money. I got overwhelmed with people saying, oh no, I can donate here. I can do this. I can do free legal. I'm a therapist. I can do free unbelievable, because people, especially, when things happen, people really they're empowered by feeling that they have something to give. And 9/11 as well. I live right by the World Trade Center. People were sharing, like these women who would have crossed to the other side of the street. For some of the people who live on the street, were sharing their water as I crossed the Manhattan Bridge. It was unbelievable.
How do you suggest people use their intuition to find their purpose? Because you were saying too, feeling of value is kind of, what allows you to sustain. But so many people don't acknowledge that they have value, don't even realize they have value. So how do you recommend using kind of your intuitive powers to find your value?
Well, first of all, I do want to address that we here's some reality testing. We tend to live in a society of somebodies and nobodies. And there are no nobodies. I mean, I
Agreed.
remember Demi Moore when she was a kid, I mean, she was like 3 years younger. Why would I talk to a younger person? But she was perseverative, and we made a friendship. And now, I mean, now Demi's the one who gets me into a restaurant,
Right.
um, you know, but it's first of all your job not to, what makes somebody somebody for you, not to swallow whole what the standard example of somebody and nobody is in the world. A. B, I wrote, but know that you're affected by those values. And so you need to protect your ego from them. We often protect by working against, they're just superficial. when you work against, you're wasting your energy. Work for. Who do you want to be? Who do you want to be with? What do you want to be appreciated for? So know that I wrote a book called The Circle, and The Circle really is the answer to how do I find my purpose while filling my desires, while growing into somebody I want to be? Because as I say to my students all the time, I have been so many people I would not want to sit down at a table with. I have been a lot of people I don't like. And the upside, though, the way that I don't carry shame or guilt, is that I have been working my whole life to be somebody I do want to be someone who I
That's so
admire.
beautiful.
And we're all works in progress. I mean, I'll go to a party and I'll be feeling insecure and I'll do that name droppy, show offy thing. And I'll think, oh my God, who are you? I mean, like, oh no. And I could fall into like shame and self-hatred. And I don't say, oh gee, okay, honey, what are you insecure about? Okay. And I cop to it very publicly, because what we keep secret, what we repress has the capacity to harm us. Whereas where you just say, oh, wow, I was a real idiot. Or don't say it, but realize it. And no, you're a work in progress. And there was some distress that made you reactive. But the circle, what the circle does, and I've used the circle with mergers and acquisitions, as a business process for companies. And I've used the circle with individuals in homeless shelters, people who are, post-divorce, have no idea who they are and have no money to be it. Mostly women. But men too. It is the wonderful thing is that things are getting more equitable, but we're getting each other's problems too.
Yes, of course, right.
Right. When gay marriage was first legal, and of course I celebrated it with everyone else who has two brains to rub together. I also called my lawyer friends and said, you should specialize in gay divorce, because 3 years from now that's coming up. But the circle, what the circle asks you to do is, first of all, and I won't go through the whole circle, but for intuition to work, it needs to know what it's working on. You get intuition all the time, but it's in a mishmash inside of you. So create a goal, and not a goal like I am going to be more organized. A goal that you really want. I say it's the thing you wake up hungry for and you go to bed missing. What is your goal? And allow that goal to be flexible. Don't change goals, because one reason we don't get our goals is that we have a target. We know what we're going for, and then something distracts us, or we need something, or something pops up. So we don't stay in a goal. Here you've picked one goal, and that goal is the context through which everything else in your life happens. That single goal. And that goal evolves. You don't change it, but it evolves. And it's interesting, one of my first goals in the circle was to be a full-time stay-at-home mother with my son. I had left my husband when I was pregnant. I couldn't travel anymore for work. Hadn't realized yet that I could do all my work by phone and still get paid. It was different times. It was 1992. And that was my goal in the circle. That's all I wanted. That goal, a few months later, got me one of the biggest advances paid for a first-time author. That goal created a New York Times bestseller. That goal created the only publishing contracts in the industry that did not have a press clause. So I refused to promote the books. I wanted to be a full-time stay-at-home mother with my son, and made a New York Times bestseller and then 5 more books. That goal did a whole bunch of other things in my life that weren't my goal. The only goal I had was to be a full-time stay-at-home mother. But through that, I became, 31 years later, the adult that I am today. Right. And so, what is your deepest goal? And we get very superstitious. I tell people, don't magicalize. You are the magic. So having a goal to be appreciated and successful and rewarded, doing what you love, doesn't mean you don't love your kids, doesn't mean you don't care about your husband or your wife or your partner.
Right.
It means that that is the context that's functional for you. If I had made my goal being I can make money to pay for my divorce and buy my home back and support my child. And if I had done that, I would have been all over the place, and I wouldn't have been able to do that because I had a new baby and my only desire was to be with that baby. So, and once you reach a goal, you make another goal. And once you have a goal, then you use mindfulness in a new way. You were going to say something, but remind me about mindfulness.
Keep going. No, keep going.
So once you have a goal, you start with mindfulness, because mindfulness is not meditation. Mindfulness is being alive. Mindfulness is being in you. That's all mindfulness is. And it's really hard, which is why there's all this work around mindfulness, is that it's not easy. Being in you, being in me is really hard. There's a lot of conflicts and challenges and histories and future worries and ailments and etc. and needs, to pee, to eat, to change position. I mean, it's a demanding thing being present. But you start with mindfulness, and on Instagram, we start every get together with being mindful and connecting in that mindfulness. So facilitating each other, which we just do through our breath. Just, we are suspending the illusion of separateness, and we're realizing we can help each other. Not that you're separate when you think you're separate, but if you don't know a door can open, you won't open it. So we allow this help because we suspend the illusion that it is not there anyway. To your mindfulness, you allow, and I'm going to tell you why you don't fantasize or create. You allow the experience of what it is your goal is as if it had happened. You allow it. You don't look for it. You may not even notice it. What you may notice is that there are sensory shifts when you allow that are new to you. And that is you connecting with an alternate reality, an alternate future, reframing your past so that it's useful. Because if it's not useful, don't remember it. I mean, if it's not useful, it'll come up when it's useful. And it shifts your telepathy in a way that you create real change. And that's just the first two elements of the circle: conscious creation and embodiment. And it is a way that we train our intuition to work for us and not against us, because intuition can just as easily find the next reason in the world that you can interpret that you're worthless and you can't do what you want. And by the way, when you're mindful, guess what comes up? Obstacles. When you embody, when you allow that new reality, guess what comes up? Obstacles. Guess what? Obstacles, when you're conscious of them, become tools. Oh, this is an obstacle. Let me do something about it. For me, an obstacle to being a full-time stay-at-home mother with my child at 33 was that I had no way of making a living. I lived in an expensive city, and I had a very expensive legal battle that was definitely going to happen. I did the circle. I was mindful and I embodied, I allowed, and I, in a play space, while my, 7-month-old was eating sand, a top New York agent sat down next to me and said, "What are you writing?" I said, "You know what? I've gotten myself into a pickle." That was before I knew how to swear. "I've gotten myself into a pickle, and I'm using a methodology that I was tested on and trained in to get myself out of it." And she said, "Oh, let me see." And I said, "You couldn't even read my writing. Everyone in my family is a doctor," and came up with every excuse why she couldn't see. And she was persistent. I let her see. And she said, "This is a book." And I said, "No, it isn't." And of course, I'd always wanted to be a writer, even as a child. "No, this is a book." And nah. She said, "Here's my card." Now, this is before Google, but she was well known enough that everyone I talked to about it said that is a top New York agent. She knows what she's talking about. And very shortly thereafter, I had a big check.
So talk about
And
in that scenario, you were embodying the idea of just being like, talk about the embodying and how it kind of.
not the idea. So although we tend to experience our thoughts in words, we experience our life through our five senses. And embodying is sensory. It's allowing, like I'm doing it as I'm speaking to you, as I'm here and connecting with you, because I wouldn't want to miss the deliciousness of connecting with you. I'm also allowing the experience of what it is I have determined I will create, what I'm consciously creating. I'm allowing it. Now, I may not notice it because my primary focus is on our interaction, but
Right.
I'm opening my sensory receptors to that. And as I do, there's a very complex process that happens. I connect with things in the future. I may be dialoguing telepathically, even with people I haven't met, but who are connected to what I need to have happen, which I don't know I need, but I know I need. I'm reframing the past so it functions in terms of the present. And I'm having this conversation in a way that who knows, someone may hear it and help create that new reality. One of the confusing things about doing that is that we're taught to communicate in words. And even with telepathy, you communicate experience, not words. Words get lost. The other thing is that we are trained in positive visualization and fantasy. But the reality is you can only visualize or fantasize from a paradigm that you already have experienced.
Right.
Whereas your present and even your future holds infinite possibilities. And to connect with those, fantasy doesn't help.
That's a really interesting point because I think that's, what do you think of the idea of mood boards and when people do that? Is that
What
limiting?
is a mood board?
Yes, I figured. Like, it's
I mean,
like people.
I do love altars. So for example, I have altars all around my house. Everything in my house actually is an altar. And I clean those altars and I move things on those altars and I add special things to those altars because an altar is a physical representation of what you're creating. And sometimes I'll move things on an altar and then I'll look at it and I'll let the altar speak to me and say, oh, this is what you're creating. And I'll say, oops, didn't mean that.
Right.
Let me move that heart a little further away from that business piece. Or let me, so I mean, ritual, I have experienced that ritual has the power you give it. Every day we light the candle in back of me as a group.
Mhm.
And we give it the power to create a new reality for us, to create that communication in the world between us and world, us and events, to create a new reality. Does the candle have any power? Absolutely not, but we do. And when we join together, boy, oh boy, that's a super radio tower.
Right.
That is an atomic uh, incident, because when people join moving it at a certain vibration, for lack of a better word, a certain frequency, that is immensely powerful. So if a mood board can speak to you, or if you can externalize something, take it out of your messy self and make it tangible and visible, that can be very useful, especially if it's a consistent thing, because you don't want something. I know people do vision boards, but those are
Yeah, my dear.
static. Yeah. So when you do a vision board, it's really important to keep doing them and to notice how they change, because that's how you're changing. And that will give your intuition, your intellect, and your emotions some powerful information about how you can change more consistently and more consciously.
So talking about using the candle as an example, which is basically going back to this idea, everything is intention, right? Everything, but talk
And
and
act.
and action, but talk about this idea of the intention for the candle Talk about the difference of intention versus mentally wanting something.
Well, when you mentally want something, you may be wanting it from, I mean, first of all, oh, that we were as simple as the mantras we make, right? When
Yeah.
you want something perhaps with worry, you won't get it. You want something with your whole history of different obstacles. You want something not knowing all of your potential because you don't know who you're going to be a minute from now, let alone a year from now. I mean, you do know intuitively, but your patterns block a lot of that out. So wanting is an acknowledgement of lack. Whereas, and it's good to acknowledge lack, we need to be realistic, but wanting is an acknowledgement of lack. It doesn't organize your resources and the resources around you in a direction that's just creating. So when I light that candle with my group, all of us are saying, yeah, we know our lack. Boy, do we know our lack. And yes, we know a bunch of the obstacles. And yeah, we don't believe in this. And yeah, it's just a stupid candle and she's a weird psychic and blah, blah, blah. But in that moment, we are galvanizing together our intention that despite all of those other things, this is what we're doing now. This is the game plan.
So tell me. No, go ahead.
No, you go
Finish
ahead.
the thought. Because I was about to switch. Because I was going to say, tell me earlier. You said earlier you were talking about how you're like anyone and anything. You have a harder time with your own psychicness and intuition for yourself than anyone else. Right. Everyone else you can read. And by the way, again, listen to episode 78. She has amazing stories. I mean, yes, you work for companies, but the stuff you have done and you've helped solve crimes and you can find. I mean, you're a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant psychic.
Thank you.
Tell me just a funny story where the radar was not working for you.
Oh my God. Every relationship I've ever had until this man. So I, in relationship, always picked my parents. And I was raised by a manic depressive mother who you had to remind during manic episodes that clothing were not optional to walk out the door in our New York City apartment. So and who I spent from birth trying to delight and charm and save. And she suicided 2 days after my 14th birthday.
Oh, I know. The story is so tragic.
So I was raised by her, and I was raised by my father, who is a classic narcissist with a very heavy backhand, who never tells you anything good about yourself. As a matter of fact, I am now responsible for his care. He's 92 years old, and his warmest compliment to me is, "I'm so glad I didn't abort you." Literally, he says that to me. He embraces me goodbye. And he is nothing if not grateful because I'm the only one left. I've had 2 siblings suicide. I'm the only one left to take care of him. But he embraces me and he says, "I'm so glad I didn't abort you." But you know what? Not a trigger for me anymore. Because now, he's 92 and wobbly. I'm 64 and tough. I could abort him if I wanted to, but I don't because that's not who I choose to be. So I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
No, we're talking about your radar, like where it's failed you sometimes. Okay. So relationships, you were saying.
I picked people to save who were thoughtless with me. Those were the relationships that I was comfortable in because we love our parents. And even if as adults we're too smart to love in the admiring sense, we love our parents. That's the first thing we know are our caretakers. They are the prototype. So I kept picking the same people over and over again. And actually, if someone was, kind to me and functional and had a job and all those things, they weren't interesting to me. So after the end of my last relationship, I decided that this was just not something I was going to heal in this lifetime. And I asked my 2 dearest girlfriends who had long-term marriages to wonderful partners to introduce me and to join us at dinner because I did not want to, the whole dating thing, I'd never really done it, didn't want to do it. Join us at dinner to men and I had a list. It was a short list. I wanted nothing to do with the arts or Hollywood, age appropriate. They had to have been married and divorced, good to their wives and good fathers. And those were my criteria. I didn't care if they worked at a gas station. I mean, I really identified these are the important things for me. And those are the only men I dated. And I used discipline. If I went to a party and someone asked me out, I said, thank you so much. That's so kind. And I told the hostess, please tell him that I'm not dating. If I liked someone, I left the party because I was worried about my own impulsiveness. I only dated these men. And I remember the night I met my husband. And I walked in and my friends were there. I was the last to arrive. I called my friend after, and I actually emailed her. I had discovered email by that point. That was 12 years ago. I emailed her. So nice, completely not my type. Please don't encourage him. She said, not your type. Maybe that's a good thing. And I had a 3-date rule because I knew I wouldn't be attracted to anyone who didn't need saving and didn't have all the criteria my parents had. And it took me a while. I mean, he loved his family. He had no real trauma. He was successful. He was employed. He had his own home. He'd raised children. He was a good father. He was a good ex-husband. There was no hook. I wasn't useful at all. And
useful.
And he said to me one day, I did the 3 dates, and he said, listen, I'm not going to stalk you, but I'm not going to go away unless you tell me to. And we've been married 9 years, together 12. And he has, as relationships do, he has reformed my universe. And I his, because I was exactly what he needed as well. So that is where intuition would literally,
cloudy.
Well, not just cloudy. It took me
storms
directly in the right direction for my 4-year-old self who couldn't leave home and needed to learn to get along with these adults, but absolutely not for my adult self.
How do you communicate with your mom and now your siblings?
I do. I try not to talk about it publicly because I always worry that my companies will be listening. But I do. And I've actually isolated them in a small part of my house because I would hear
like an
my
altar
sister
for them or something.
It's more of a cage. I would hear my sister say, oh, my kid is doing this. You need to do this. And I'm like, you should have thought about that before you took a massive overdose, because I actually have my own things to do. But then, of course, being as codependent as I am, I would do it anyway. So I've really made a rule that I inhabit myself. Once a day, I go and I sit in front of them and I hear and I talk, but I try to really set boundaries because, and it's funny because I know a lot of mediums, and good mediums will tell you not every dead person is saying I'm at peace, I'm happy. Some are saying, hey, what, you couldn't wait 2 weeks to wear my favorite sweater? I mean, these are still relationships, and they do need to be worked on. People often speak and don't listen to their non-local relationships, including with DPs, dead people. And, I have a story that I love and that I think is an important story. I always saw the energy of people who had died, whether they're dead people or just a vibration, who knows? But, I don't want to commit to a methodology, to a belief system here. But even when I was a little child, and when my mother died, and I was madly in love with my mother. She died, back then 14 wasn't adolescence yet. My mother was my love. And when she died, she was the only dead person I didn't see. And I was heartbroken. And I was furious. And I never had to do things to see dead people, like light candles or sit in a cell. All that frill was never. They would be there and they'd say, did you remember your book bag? And I go, oh no. And I'd go get it was a very functional, normal relationship with people who were dead. For my mother, I literally, I looked at everything like to conjure her. Nothing, nada, zilch. And when I was 19 years old, I'll never forget this. I was in back of a red Mini Morris. I was in we'd made the trunk into a sleeping area. And I was in some foreign country. I don't remember which country. And all of a sudden I saw her and I burst into tears.
Mm.
And I realized in that moment that if I had seen her, I would have joined her. That mourning and being in life is so important before you work on a relationship with someone who is on another plane, because your job as a living being is to be a living being. And so mourning is such an important gift. Mourning is the acknowledgement of value. Mourning is the owning for self the parts of that value that you need to move forward functionally in your life. And mourning is that vulnerable, tender living place where you reconnect or connect for the first time with others in the world who that person who died taught you to love and connect with. So it's so important. I'm very against immediately trying to communicate. There are times where that's an exception. If a child dies, you want as a parent to, God forbid, to facilitate that child more than you want to be healthy. But it's a very tricky thing. By and large, it's important to bury, to observe mourning, and then when you're in that next life, to connect. And that next life is when that dead person is a functional part of your current reality.
Has your relationship with them changed?
Oh yeah, because I've changed and they've changed. So much. I was the oldest sister and I was the, devoted child to my mother. One of the things I really realized is how much my mother's helped me in ways that I didn't identify as she in the, when they happened. And my relationship with my siblings has changed an enormous amount because we're growing. Just because someone dies, they don't stay static in time. And once again, this is my experience. I'm very proof oriented. So what I have proof with dead people is that you can get from that energy accurate things about them, what's going on now. In murders, they can often give you important information that you might not have another way of knowing. But it's also possible that you know that intuitively and it's being framed in terms of this person. I have had the experience of dead people telling me something like where to find a watch that they hid in their parents' vacation home. That the only purpose of it would have been that the person I'm speaking to needs to be reassured that they're actually speaking to that person. So I wonder, why would that come out of the blue? The person wasn't looking for the watch. Like it's, but I don't, right. I am at heart a scientist. I know
I love that about you.
Well, thank you. Some people don't. Some people find it not spiritual enough. But I think
that's what makes you so. Yeah, and that's what makes you so fascinating. I feel like is this interesting blend of like you like proof, like you've said it a few times. You like proof, you like the data points, yet you are someone who's psychic and, like you said, has helped solve murders, helps companies with predictions, has helped people. I mean, I love it. But you're like, nope, there needs to be. Yeah.
That when you get a license plate number or where a body's buried, that's proof. When you predict the future and the future comes up, that's proof. This other, how we can do that, we postulatize. I lost that word. It's a postulate. How it works. I have a experience of how it works. I could be wrong. That it does work is irrefutable because my companies keep track. I mean, back in the old
Yes,
days
there's data.
before computers, they had books and they would review them of my prediction. And believe me, more than tell me I was right. They say, you were off here. And I'm like, I'm not God, you know? But,
Do you think that's why
but
you
it,
like working with companies and police departments? Do you feel like that's why you tend to enjoy
well, I
doing
don't
that
work
more
with
than
police departments anymore because police departments don't pay. And I really only did missing children because adults often want not to be found. And a lot of it's none of my business.
that's
But,
interesting too.
but I like working. Really, the reason I like working with companies is that, yes, I know when I'm right or wrong, and they're not going to humor me. It's not subjective. You know, when you say something to someone, it's what they remember, how they documented it. If it can be very subjective. So it's reassuring to me that I'm psychic and not psychotic. But the other reason that I'm very cautious with people is that I might be the only voice, and people
Mm,
believe so easily. Um, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a
right.
physician. I'm not a financial manager. You know, I'm not qualified to do a lot of the things that people come to an intuitive to have done that could be better done. I used to love when people would come in and say, you know, do I have HIV? And I'd say, you know, there's a really accurate, not that I would get an answer, but I wouldn't give it. There's a really accurate test you can take. And then with the test, you're in a place where if it's a yes, they can say, and here's the treatment, let's start you today. You know, so I think I
What do you think
really,
that's about? Do you think someone comes in with that question because even though you can give them the answer, it's in their mind, it's not tangibly a reality yet, and they can like get their head wrapped around it?
well, yes. And I think people want reassurance. You know, it's like people saying, am I going to fall in love? That's not an intuitive question. If you want to fall in love, the question is, how do I find my partner in the next 6 months? And then I might say, you know, I don't see 6 months because I sense that this is going on and you're going to be making an unexpected geographic move and blah, blah, blah. But because often the response to a question isn't a direct response to the question itself. And, but, but, but really the best use of intuition isn't prediction. You use prediction to work back and see where someone can do something different. But that's really not how people use prediction. And also, people use prediction to substitute, to like find some magic way to substitute something that they could do better using another, you know, someone qualified. So, for example, if I know someone is in therapy, because I have a lot of students and I read all of my students, I'm a compulsive reader. I love reading. It's the way I say hello.
Right.
And some of them love that. Some of them find
Some
it a
don't.
little interesting. But, but you know, if I know a student is in therapy, I will say to them, and I always start with a person, not so much with businesses, but with a person, I start, this is one intuitive's impression. I could be wrong. But I'll say, for example, I have a feeling you're making a lot of big decisions around your marriage. And I think that you need to speak to your therapist and you know what, I'm going to use a real example. Uh, I have a friend who doesn't realize that she's absolutely headed for a divorce with someone who knows their rights.
Oh,
And
yeah.
when she asks me, what I say is, you don't need a psychic, you need a lawyer, and you need to check the following things because I know intuitively where the weak points are, but
Yep.
not to work it through with me to bring it to a lawyer. And
Has
then
she
as a
done it?
friend, I try to find who is the most kick-ass lawyer who's not going to charge an arm and a leg. I mean, I have a referral list that's incredible. So when someone comes to me and say, do I have breast cancer? I have an oncologist, you know, or an imaging place that I can send them to and say, this is a far more realistic answer.
Yeah, that's got to be kind of a burden on some of those. Not a burden, but like that's tough when people want some of these answers, like you said, that they're just scared to receive in a different way.
But we all do that all the time.
Yeah.
My husband, who has refused to read, has finally become a good reader, and I incessantly ask him questions. Um, I mean, it's true. You ask that of your doctor, your financial advisor, do you think this will work out? You ask your
True.
therapist, you ask your friend. I mean, at least as a psychic, you're getting paid for it. But I really train my students to be very careful because often someone's afraid of a relationship, for example, and they're asking for reassurance. So, and then they use that reassurance to not go out and make the changes and do the things that would give them a much healthier relationship than just waiting for a prediction happen would. Predictions do tend to happen if the intuitive is good. And I really think if you're going to an intuitive, get a referral from the toughest, most grounded person you know, not the person who has crystal balls all around their house. And by the way, the other thing is, I've had a lot of challenges in my life, but and a lot of them I've created for myself. I'm the best at picking a wall I know and walking right into it. But I've always ended up in a better position. And I would have, it's like looking for a plastic surgeon. You don't want a plastic surgeon who looks crappy.
Nope.
With an intuitive, is their life working? Do they have love? If they want it, do they have enough money? Is their career one that's interesting? Because if you can't use your tools for yourself, I wonder how skilled you are at using them at all.
I mean, that's, I think, a huge point. That's huge and great. I love talking to you always. You're such a shining light and so just a joy and hilarious. That's one of my favorite things about you is how funny you are. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. When you come out with your book, we have to have you back on so we
I
can
would
chat
love
about
that.
it.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And you're a barn raiser. You create a place for people to get together, to support each other and to build. And it's one of the things I've always loved about you. So thank you for having me in your barn.
Oh, I love it. You're invited to the barn whenever you want. Everyone stay tuned for her personal practice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So now it's time for Laura's personal practice, which is a meditation to find your own wisdom and personal power.
So meditation is an interesting word because we use it often as a way of leaving self. This meditation is an active meditation. It is how you grasp your power, how you inhabit self, and then how you engage intuition to create something more. So the first thing I'd like you to do, and no deep breathing, no putting your thumb and forefinger together, I want you fully present. The first thing I want you to do is be fully present. And no one can do this 100%, but what are you tasting, smelling, hearing, feeling, and seeing? Look around you, wiggle your tushy in the chair, taste the inside of your mouth, be in you. What's bothering you right now? What's lovely, even if it's just the light from a lamp in front of you. So be very present. Wiggle your fingers, your toes. Be in you. How are you? Mindfulness is the sensory response to how are you, where are you, and who are you? And I can already feel you all thinking sensory response, feeling, tasting, hearing, seeing. I missed one of those, but I'm sure you'll get it. And of course, breathe, because breathe is necessary for life, but your focus is on your being and not on your breathing. You'll notice, I'm sure many of you, that when you do this, your experience isn't light. It's complicated. It is elegant and inelegant at the same time. It's painful and reassuring at the same time. Allow yourself to experience all of it, because as you experience it, what happens is you do an automatic sorting. You have an awareness of what you want to address, how you want to move when this moment with me is over, what you need to take care of, what can take care of you that you are not availing yourself of. So as you just practice being present, eyes open, fully present, I'd like you to take a moment to suspend the illusion of separateness. Whether it's psychics or physicists, one thing we are in agreement with now, and don't forget your mindfulness as I'm speaking, one thing we are in agreement with now is that we live in a unified field. And what that means practically is what you experience is experienced infinitely by others. So as your experience shifts, as you're mindful, and in that mindfulness, if you're in a position that doesn't fit, make yourself more comfortable. If you need to move your neck, do it. If you need to pop in a mint because your mouth doesn't taste good, you go right ahead. Mindfulness is not static. It's constantly moving. But in that mindfulness is also an awareness that you are not doing this alone. That actually, when you're mindful, as issues come up, others are engaged in them. And as you notice your strength and your beauty, others are engaged in that as well. And as you're mindful, I would like you to notice one thing that you want right now more than anything else in the world. Don't think it. It will be in your gut. It'll be in your heart. It'll be in your belly. What are you crying out for? If you could have a call and the world would respond, what would that call be? Make it now and make it into a sentence. Call now. Assume that sentence will be responded to. Call now, whether it's your backer or your lover or a feeling of joy, whatever it is, call it in now. What is the one thing you need now more than you need anything else in the world? And once again, we call through our senses. Don't imagine it. You can only imagine from what you know. Don't visualize it. Visualization is just one sense. Open your receptors as if they were doors. Open your receptors to a response to that call, that one thing, that one event, a response from one person that you want more than you want anything else right now. And that is called embodiment. You add your embodiment to your mindfulness. So your mindfulness is not just an awareness of this moment, but your mindfulness is also a connection to what it is you are creating now. Again, let's take a moment to suspend the illusion of separateness. And even if you believe you're separate, one of my favorite quotes is the good scientist suspends disbelief and runs the experiment anyway. So do that now and notice throughout the next few days the synchronicities, the meaningful coincidences that seem to come up from thin air in yourself and in your life and in your relationships that affirm that this process has worked for you, that you indeed can work for you. Thank you for listening.